Folks, the report has officially dropped. The Department of Justice report into the allegations of Donald Trump's criminal conduct. We have Volume 1, which relates to the D.C. election case against Donald Trump, relating his attempt to overthrow the free and fair election. Donald Trump made a last-ditch effort on Monday night to try to block the release of the DOJ report. Judge Eileen Cannon denied it. It's 174 pages. I went through each of the pages. I want to give you a summary of what is in this DOJ report. We're going to go through it together meticulously, diligently. We're going to look at the report together. I'm not just going to give you my impressions. Let's look at it. So the report that was just released, again, 174 pages. It begins with a cover letter by Special Counsel Jack Smith to Merrick Garland. It talks about how there's Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the report. Volume 1 is the D.C. case. Volume 2 involves the case involving Donald Trump's theft of the Mar-a-Lago documents from Washington, D.C., these highly classified documents that he kept at Mar-a-Lago. Volume 2 is not being released because Waltine Nauta, Carlos de Oliveira, Donald Trump's co-defendants, are still co-defendants in that action. Special Counsel Jack Smith makes it clear in his report that the decision here ultimately to prosecute was his alone. He talks about how he exercised independent judgment, and while he relied on the counsel of others in the special counsel's office, he says he stands by the decision to bring both the Washington, D.C. case and the Mar-a-Lago document case. And while he was writing this cover letter, it was unclear whether all of this information would be released. So Special Counsel Jack Smith says, look, I'm turning this over. We'll let the court system ultimately decide what gets released, but I think these documents should be released. Volume 1 should be released as relates to the D.C. case. Volume 2 should not be released while the De Oliveira and Waltine Nauta case remains on appeal. All right, let's take a look at Volume 1. You see it for yourself right here. Volume 1, the election case. Report on efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on January 6, 2021. Folks, right here, 174 pages. We're going to go through them all very quickly together. Take a look at the table of contents, the results of the investigation, Trump's pressure on state officials, Trump's fraudulent elector plan, Trump's misuse of official power through the Justice Department, Trump's pressure on the vice president, Trump supporters attack the United States Capitol. Then there's a section on the laws that Special Counsel Jack Smith believed were violated. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, 18 U.S.C. Section 371. Obstruction and conspiracy to obstruct, 18 U.S.C. Section 1512K and C2. Conspiracy against rights, 18 U.S.C. Section 241, and then talks about other charges, defenses, co-conspirator liability, an interesting one right there. The principles of federal prosecution. Then there's Section 3, the principles of federal prosecution. Prosecuting Trump served multiple federal interests. 1, the substantial federal interest in protecting the integrity of the electoral process and the peaceful transfer of power was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. 2, the substantial federal interest in counting every citizen's vote was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. 3, the substantial federal interest in protecting election officials and other government officials from violence was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. 4, the substantial federal interest in the even-handed administration of the law was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. Then it goes on to say that Mr. Trump was not subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction. There was no adequate non-criminal alternative to prosecution. Trump's conduct had no historical analog, and then goes through the investigative process, the investigative challenges, and litigation issues. It talks about Donald Trump's claims of immunity, and then it has a conclusion. Let's take a look at this together. Again, this is Volume 1, the election case. It says, on November 18, 2022, the Attorney General appointed the special counsel to oversee an ongoing investigation into, quote, whether any person or entity violated the law in connection with efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election, or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on January 6, 2021. As a result of that investigation, on August 1, 2023, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia charged Donald J. Trump with 4 felony offenses arising from his efforts to unlawfully retain power by using fraud and deceit to overturn the 2020 election. After the Supreme Court held last summer that Trump was immune from prosecution for certain misuse of official power alleged in the indictment, a second grand jury found probable cause to return a superseding indictment charging the same offenses based on his non-immunized conduct. Trump was thereafter reelected as president of the United States, and as a result, on November 25, 2024, the special counsel moved to dismiss the case against Trump because of the Department of Justice's long-standing position that the Constitution forbids the federal indictment and prosecution of a sitting president. Volume 1 focuses on the election case against Trump, and consistent with applicable regulations provides an explanation of the prosecution decisions reached by the special counsel. The first section of this volume sets forth a summary of the key facts gleaned from the investigation, a vast majority of which are already a matter of public record through the litigation that occurred before the district court. The second section discusses the statutes that Trump was charged with violating, applying the facts developed. So it goes on and talks about the results of the investigation, and it says, in 2020, Donald Trump ran for re-election against Biden. Trump lost, as alleged in the original and superseding indictment. Substantial evidence demonstrates that Trump then engaged in unprecedented criminal effort to overturn the legitimate results of the election in order to retain power. Although he did so primarily in his private capacity as a candidate and with the assistance of multiple private co-conspirators, Trump also attempted to use the power and authority of the United States government in furtherance of the scheme. It then goes on to say Trump's false claims included dozens of specific claims regarding states, such as the large numbers of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters had cast ballots, or that voting machines had changed the votes for Trump to votes against him. These claims were demonstrably and in many cases obviously false. The office investigated whether Trump believed the claims he made. Evidence from a variety of sources established that Trump knew there was no outcome determinative fraud in the 2020 election, and that many of the specific claims he made were untrue and that he had lost the election. He knew this because some of the highest ranking officials in his own administration, including the vice president, told him directly that there was no evidence to support his claims. Mr. Trump's private advisors, both within and outside the campaign, told him the same. On November 13, his own campaign conceded its litigation in Arizona, a state pivotal to his re-election prospects. State officials and legislatures whom Trump pressured to change vote tallies or stop certification of results rebuffed him and informed him that his fraud claims were wrong, both privately and through public statements. Mr. Trump also monitored legal developments regarding the election and was on notice that state and federal courts rejected every post-election lawsuit that Trump and his allies filed, claiming outcome determinative election fraud. Trump and co-conspirators cannot have believed the specific fraud claims they were making because the numbers they touted, for instance, of dead voters in particular states, frequently vacillated wildly from day to day or were objectively impossible, including, for example, co-conspirator 3's claim about voting machines that Mr. Trump privately acknowledged sound crazy before he publicly amplified them. So Trump was saying these ideas are crazy and then amplified them. Finally, at times, Trump made comments implicitly acknowledging that he knew he had lost the election. For example, in a January 3rd, 2021 Oval Office meeting regarding a national security matter, Trump stated in part, "It's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy," meaning President-elect Biden. And then it goes on to talk about Trump aimed his deceit to try to overthrow a free and fair election. Then the report goes over Mr. Trump's schemes, always referring to him as Mr. Trump here. On page 11, Mr. Trump's fraudulent elector plan. As you get to page 15, 16, Mr. Trump's misuse of official power through the Justice Department. It goes on to talk about, on page 20, Mr. Trump's pressure on the vice president. You keep going down. On page 23, Mr. Trump's supporters attack the United States Capitol, and it has photographs of the attack on the Capitol at the behest of Donald Trump, who again knew there was no outcome determinative fraud. You start going to page 33. It talks about the law, the various statutes that I mentioned at the beginning. Then it applies the law to the facts and explains why it was that Special Counsel Jack Smith is confident that he would have secured a guilty verdict had he had the opportunity to bring the case to trial, but for the United States Supreme Court delaying, finding absolute immunity. Even with their finding of immunity, Special Counsel Jack Smith essentially says he does not believe that, the immunity would have prevailed in the final instance. Then let's just go to the conclusion right here. I think it's important that we read that, and there's a bunch of other kind of letters that are attached to this, and it goes on to basically say that in conclusion, Special Counsel Jack Smith is confident that he would have been able to prosecute these claims successfully, and he was exercising his own independent judgment at all times. Here it is. Let me read the word specifically for you. I want you to read it on page 136, for example, before there's an addendum. On remand from the Supreme Court's decision in Trump, the district court set a litigation schedule whereby the parties would submit briefs regarding whether any material in the superseding indictment was subject to presidential immunity. The parties were in the middle of that process when the results of the presidential election made clear that Trump would be inaugurated as president of the United States. As described above, it was the department's interpretation that the Constitution forbids federal indictment and prosecution of a sitting president, but the election results raised for the first time the question of the lawful course when a private citizen who has already been indicted is then elected president. The department determined that the case must be dismissed without prejudice before Trump takes office, and the office therefore moved to dismiss the indictment. The district court granted the motion. The department's view that the Constitution prohibits continued indictment and prosecution of a president is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes charged, the strength of the government's proved, or the merits of the prosecution, which the office stands fully behind. Indeed, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. So, folks, I truncated that into 14 minutes, 174-page report right there. Go and read it for yourself. A lot that was publicly known, but hearing Special Counsel Jack Smith say it in his own words, and also some of those other Easter eggs that were in it about Donald Trump making these admissions, stunning admissions, if you will, that he was aware that he lost. Folks, you heard it here first on the MeidasTouch Network, so hit subscribe. Help us get to 4 million subscribers. You could also support our work at MeidasPlus.com. Thank you so much for watching.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.